22 million black victims of Americanism are waking up, and they're gaining a new political consciousness, becoming politically mature. And as they develop this political maturity, they're able to see the recent trends in these political elections. Any minority that has a block of votes that stick together is in a strategic position. Either way you go, that's who gets it. You're in a position to determine who go to the White House and who stay in the doghouse. You're the one who has that power. You and I have never seen democracy. All we've seen is hypocrisy. When we open our eyes today and look around America, we see America not through the eyes of someone who has enjoyed the fruits of Americanism. We see America through the eyes of someone who has been the victim of Americanism. We don't see any American dream. We've experienced only the American nightmare. We haven't benefited from America's democracy. We've only suffered from America's hypocrisy. And the generation that's coming up now can see it and are not afraid to say it. 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 And are not afraid to say it.
The show that is not afraid to say it. Shout out again. I always big up Brother Malcolm X as you hear that little clip from his 1964 speech, The Ballot or the Bullet. Welcome. This is BlackWestchester.com presents the People Before Politics radio show. We're on every Sunday, 6 to 8, on intermixradio.com, giving you that real talk for the community since 2014. We got a couple of candidates coming through today from different elections. Mr. Peters from the Rochelle City Council race. We got a Westchester County judge coming in after that. And then we have former Mayor Ernie Davis coming in sometime in the 7 o'clock hour. So we're definitely going to be full with that. I know a lot of people want to hear me talk about a lot of the issues, but we're not going to address all of them with all the candidates here. But tomorrow we will be addressing everything in the opening of our show on WVOX, the Black Westchester Power Hour from 11 a.m. to 12 noon. Make sure you tune in to WVOX or WVOX.com and check that out. So the one thing we do have to talk about is the big news item this week was Mount Vernon Corporation Counsel Lawrence Picari was arrested, arraigned, and indicted. Mount Vernon City Council Corporation, Mount Vernon Corporation Counsel Lawrence Picari was arrested, arraigned, and indicted. You can go to blackwestchester.com to check out the whole story. Actually, you can check any news source locally and check the story, but we have it on blackwestchester.com. Yeah, that's a big deal for the Thomas administration for the election. For the corruption case that the mayor has. I know, so Mr. Bakari pled not guilty, and he shows up in court, I believe this week on the 6th. He is due back to court. Mayor Thomas is due back in court. The jury selection for his case will be July 8th. What's ironic, and I will be dealing with that more in the paper, what's ironic is that the grand jury, according to Mayor Thomas's lawyers, because that's the only place I heard it, decided not to indict him for misappropriating the funds for the water department, but then indicted the corporation counsel for misappropriating the funds in the water department to pay Mayor Thomas's legal fees. I still find that a little bit very interesting. I don't know how that worked out. I'm sure everything will come out very soon. But that was the big news of today. Now, without further ado, let me introduce my man, 50 Grand, co-host of the show, Dr. Robert Baskerville, a.k.a. Brooklyn Bob, one of the original hounds of the Baskervilles.
AJ, what's up? What's up, all the listeners?
Go ahead.
Good to be with you.
Shout out to Lorraine Lopez, who is not with us today. She is a little under the weather. I guess we're having a Facebook problem again this week too. I do not know what's going on with Facebook at this point. So, people on Facebook cannot hear me. So I'm gonna tell them go to the website, but they can't hear me because I don't see it on Facebook yet. But anyway, so Lorraine's not here this week. I don't expect Damon to call in, but you never know when he might call in and surprise us. But you will definitely be in the building tomorrow for WVOX for the Black Westchester Power Hour. So real quick, Bob, anything you want to address for this week, and then we're going to introduce our first guest.
Well, the news of Picari's indictment suggests that this is just the accumulation of years of corruption and malfeasance on the part of the Thomas administration. It really is a vindication, unfortunately, of the criticisms that have been offered up by a number of different forces in the city of Mount Vernon with respect to the way the Thomas administration has conducted itself. I'll want to note that that's true of both Black Westchester as a news organization, which has continuously raised questions about the propriety of Corporation Counsel Picari's actions while he's been in office. And I also want to point out that in addition is a real vindication of the alarm that was sounded by Councilman Andre Wallace a couple of months ago regarding specifically mismanagement, misuse of funds from the Department of Water. It's shameful and unfortunate that the Thomas administration should find itself swept up in a maelstrom of corruption that never seems to end.
With that, we're going to introduce our first guest, running for New Rochelle City Councilman, David Peters, if he can enter the studio. Okay. And have a seat. Yes. Any of these seats? Yeah. That's perfect right there. Yes. Let me see. You're in the shot. Yes, you are. And let me give you an official Black Westchester round of applause. And, what happened to the sound check? Nope, we got two of them.
Let me fill in.
We got two of them. I got two screens. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're running for
Councilperson in
District 3. That's what I was trying to remember. District 3. First and foremost, why are you running, and why should the people vote for you?
Thank you for that question. The reason why I decided to run for councilperson in District 3 is that I've been living in New Rochelle for most of my life and raised here in New Rochelle. Mm-hmm. And New Rochelle over the years has been a city that has many strengths that are oftentimes talked about in relationship to diversity and a lot of reasons for why people come to New Rochelle. But in relationship to District 3 in particular, there are also many challenges that historically have remained in place, whether those challenges were challenges associated with housing, whether those challenges were associated with having an opportunity for economic viability vis-a-vis businesses being within the district. You know, there was a time when
pull the mic closer.
There was a time when these things existed within District 3, particularly within the Lincoln Avenue corridor, if you will.
Right.
And then historically, they were removed with the installation of 95 highway, right? And so
I just want to say, full disclosure, In my misspent youth, I'm a graduate of UCLA, the University of the corner of Lincoln Avenue.
So, so you know, right?
Yeah,
So you know. So I guess I'm saying all that to say that I have a stake in this particular community.
Yes.
And the other reason why wanting to run is because District 3 also has doesn't have contiguous boundaries, meaning that it's a very wide district, and so with respect to that, there's an opportunity to, in this transformative time, to really try to move towards having collective impact. And what I mean by collective impact is the opportunity to be engaged not only in the community that I was initially describing, but also within our historic district, within District 3, and in other areas within District 3 where class and race sort of merge at times. And so the tension of that sort of merging of ideas and thoughts and desires and needs, I really want to participate in being able to pull that together collectively, and not necessarily have a district that is thinking about so many different ways of functioning, particularly within the city of New Rochelle.
Now the district has come, again, I've spent a lot of time, was a member of St. Catherine. My mother and my stepmother both were members. My brother, my stepmother's family grew up in 33, and my brother's father had a print shop on North and Lincoln, right on the corner there.
Right.
So and then 95, we've had the functions in 95.
That's right. So you're familiar
with I'm the whole
the whole thing,
the boys club, that whole area.
Right.
So
That's right.
Yeah. So well, one thing I ask everybody, and I sometimes forget at the end. So let's get that out the way. People are gonna see you for the first time, hear you for the first time. How do they get in touch with you? Is there a website? They want to know more about you, volunteer to your campaign, donate or something. Website, social media?
Well, the website that we have up right now is in terms of Facebook is Friends of David Peters on Facebook.
Okay.
All right, so I can be accessed in that particular way. But the other piece of it, too, in getting in touch with me is I'm really interested in getting in touch with people. So as they begin to do that, I'm very much interested in getting out into District 3 and having meet and greets and talking with people. I kind of want to be able to define my own narrative, if you will, and sometimes people have different pieces of who you might be without having an opportunity to talk to you. So I'm constituency based, right? I'm a community organizer. I've been engaged and involved in a number of activities.
We share a common friend, Sandy Barnaby.
Correct.
Yes,
that's right. So we share that particular
She's a good friend of the show, yes.
Absolutely. So I believe in talking to people and embracing the tension that that dialogue might bring with the opportunities that I think emerge from that is really why I want to be able to talk to people and to spend time with people and to let them know how I think about this district. I think in New Rochelle in particular, we're in a very transformative time. This has not, what's happening now around the development will probably change New Rochelle for the next 100 years, to be quite frank with you. And so with respect to that, with the current council person deciding that he's not going to continue to run, I really felt compelled that this was a
shout to Jared Rice
around Jared Rice, right?
Good friend of the show, yeah.
Absolutely. So that this was a time really to emerge in a way in which hopefully the kind of things that I think a lot about and other people that I talk will have an opportunity for that to happen.
Now, what would you say are maybe some of the biggest issues District 3 is facing, and what will you do to make them better?
Well, from the point of view that I have around District 3 is one of the things that I'm very much interested in is equity and inclusion, right? So a couple of years ago when the city began its campaign to have more community involvement in relationship to what this development could look like, I began to organize with a number of other people around trying to ensure that a community benefits agreement would come out of this so that the developers, such as they might be, were not the only individuals who were pretty much making out really well as in relationship to everything that's happening in New Rochelle, right? So I was very much interested in that. I was interested in local hire, that people who live in New Rochelle, who may be working or may not, have an opportunity to participate within the economic renaissance such as is being described by the city. I was also interested in union jobs, and let me be real clear around this, around union jobs. Part of my interest with respect to that was that in learning about the development process here in New Rochelle, it was real clear to me that 95% of the development that was going on, and they'll tell you this themselves, was non-union work, right? And so with regards to the middle class opportunities that exist with union construction and development, it was important for me to be engaged with the unions in some fashion, to begin that kind of conversation. Now the unions, by and large, historically, haven't necessarily been the best friends in relationship to the communities that I'm talking about in terms of inclusion and access. But what I came to find out was that at this moment in time, they are clearly engaged and involved and want to be involved with community groups. So in reaching out to them, we talked a little bit about a pre-apprenticeship program. And that pre-apprenticeship program, if and when development is associated with unions having that particular job, that they will green light individuals directly into the unions through a apprenticeship program. So that was important. What that does, not only does it allow for people who are currently in New Rochelle, where there are many people who are union workers who live in New Rochelle but are not involved in these developments. So for me, it just didn't make sense. It was difficult for me to understand how we would not want to have local hire happening in New Rochelle, how we wouldn't want to have an opportunity for adults who are engaged and involved and not working to be able to be engaged and involved more effectively. To me, that was really an important thing that needed to happen. The other part of this that was important for me in terms of all of this stuff was that we began to look at housing and affordable housing that was not, that was able for people to live there, to be able to stay there. So part of what many people's concerns are in District 3 in particular is that they don't necessarily be gentrified out of the process of being able to stay in New Rochelle, and that's a concern. The word gentrification is oftentimes used, and what happens with that word is that it brings in a lot of fear and anger and concerns. And so what I hope to be able to bring to the table is a more measured response around affordability and the things along those lines. So I was very much interested in that around housing. The other thing that not only myself but others were very much concerned about was also to begin to think about how can we frame the way in which these benefits outreach and extend into our youth within the community. So we were very much interested in thinking about that, and so part of the community benefits that we talked about was the development of a youth center or some youth capacity for things. We wanted that to be able to happen. The other thing is that we were interested in conversations not only with the city but also with the developers, and so part of the work that I've been engaged and involved in is to meet directly with another group of people around meeting with RXR as a master developer to begin to have conversations that might also create additional opportunities for these things to happen. So there are a number of ways in which points of entry need to occur around this transformation. And part of what I think and know that I bring to the table is an opportunity and a mind to consider implementation science and to consider how to get things done. But more importantly, I'm constituency based. I'm interested in relationships that exist between community members, government, and private entities. I don't believe that our current model of governance is as effective for the times that we're describing, such as it is right now. So that's a part of it as well.
So can you just elaborate a little bit more on exactly what the current model of governance looks like in New Rochelle and I guess by extension other municipalities in Westchester County, and what it is lacking that you think is kind of off the mark and that you're hoping your candidacy, if you're successful, is going to rectify?
Well, I think from my point of view, the biggest part of this has been around community engagement. And I think the governance model associated with how things have occurred in New Rochelle have been mostly limited to the fact that we have a city council and the mayor who decide around the policies and practices and make decisions around the direction that New Rochelle needs to go in. And in relationship to that, we have various ways in which those decisions finally happen. And one of the things that I believe has not necessarily been as effective as it could be was to begin to listen to the community itself, right? And to be not fearful of a model of innovation that comes out of the members of the community itself. And I think that for whatever reason over time, what I've sensed is that there's been a fear of that innovative sort of spirit of what communities bring to the table. And so it's been very challenging to be able to get the city to consider and to think about these things in that way. And so what happens is that there's, you wind up having a lot of frustration around things that happen. There's not a level of transparency in partnership in getting things done. So the governance model that I'm describing is a partnership model in which community engagement has a real stake in what's happening in the particular district that I'm interested in now as running for council person there, but also for the city of New Rochelle as a whole. I just believe that overall that kind of a model has not been utilized as effectively as it could be.
Right. So now you mentioned the issue of equity and gentrification as being,
Mostly equity and inclusion.
Equity and inclusion, and the
What's the
possible-
difference between inclusion and gentrification?
What's the difference between inclusion
Yeah.
and gentrification? Well, I think when we talk about the term gentrification historically has been defined as a process where individuals who have been outside of a particular community and within the dominant class, however that's being defined, enter into a historical area, and entering into that historical area, they bring in resources and begin to change the overarching cultural way in which people who live in the community have come to live, and the way in which they live their lives out. In relationship to that, what it does is that you're bringing in people who perhaps can afford to change the way in which businesses change, that were there before are no longer there. Other types of businesses come in. Oftentimes the rates for housing goes up, and before you know it, the way of life in which people lived in terms of how they've come to understand their community has all of a sudden seemed to disappear. It becomes invisible. And so the gentrification of the neighborhood speaks to a changing of the way in which the neighborhood is constructed and historically has been able to maintain a way of life. When you're talking about inclusion, the difference is, as I'm understanding it, as I think about it, is that inclusion means what I was talking about earlier, about being more involved in the governance model, being more engaged on the impact, the collective impact of the decisions that are occurring from the standpoint of the city along the way. And so inclusion means to be more engaged on the needs of the constituency in which are represented, in this case by District 3.
I'm sorry, and I interrupted Bob. His question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's all right. So I wanted to know what other issues besides the issue of equity, youth development, and gentrification do you think has gone unaddressed by the dominant model of governance, and that your alternative that makes inclusion of the community, voices of the community, more central, what issues do you think will be captured if you're elected and are able to persuade the rest of your colleagues to move to a more kind of inclusive?
Right. Well, one of the things that caught my attention in New Rochelle, and this may be the case in other cities, I'm not sure, but we have in New Rochelle, we have a school board and school situation where the school board in New Rochelle really manages whatever goes on around the schools and education within the city of New Rochelle. And the city of New Rochelle, separate from that, manages the city for the most part, with the city manager involved, right? With this new development, one of the things that has come up, quite frankly, has been the sense that what's going to happen with children coming in, perhaps with new kids coming in, not having necessarily schools that are available to meet the needs of new children coming into the school system, right? And so one of the things that I'm very much interested in is to begin to consider that there needs to be more of a dialogue between the city and the school board around the decisions that need to be made around what's going to be happening with our schools. When I go around and talk to people around running for our city councilman, what comes up more often than not has not been the development. It hasn't been local hire. It hasn't been a sense of affordable housing. The thing most on the minds of the constituents in the city of New Rochelle is what's going on with our schools, right? And so we have a model that doesn't necessarily speak to that sort of integration and thinking in a transparent way around what could occur. And so I believe that that's an important area if I'm able to become a councilman that I want to be engaged in. I also think that one of the areas that I'd like to be involved in is around interrupting the poverty that exists within the city of New Rochelle. Within District 3 and some of our other districts, New Rochelle is a city where we have people who are not faring as well as some of the other individuals who live in New Rochelle, right? And I think that one of the things that I like to see happen is to interrupt poverty in a different way. And what I mean by that is that I'd like to reimagine, if elected council person, I'd like to convene the various service providers and all of the other individuals who are in New Rochelle, who are engaged, involved with many who exist in our communities, and to begin to think about what are some more transformative ways that we can expand on really reaching deeply into some of the situations that are occurring. And from that context, part of my work life has exposed me to something that's called generational, two generational responses, where you're looking at not only responding to generations that might be involved in front of you, but also thinking about the impact that have occurred historically, whether it's with their grandmother or whether it's with their great-grandmother or their aunt, and to look at things from a two-gen perspective as opposed to one. So these are some of the things as a social worker that I've been exposed to and want to be able to bring to the city.
I have to say that your remarks about the imbalance between the expansion of the residency of New Rochelle and the failure of the school district to begin to put in place adequate provisions for a growing population.
I want to be careful not necessarily to characterize it as a failure,
Mhm.
because they operate on very separate tracks.
Right.
So in relationship to that, when you ask me about a governance model, I'm not suggesting that somehow, some way, they all of a sudden continue to work independent of each other. What I am suggesting is that I think moving forward that there needs to be a closer relationship between the two.
Right.
Right, in order to bring about some changes that I think could be effective for the district. Children in District 3 and in other districts have been bussed outside of their district for over 50 years,
Mhm.
right? And we have a city and we have a school system that basically we have individuals who are living, quite frankly, in segregated places and spaces in many cases.
Right.
And so my sense of this is as we are thinking about new developments, as we're looking at new things, ultimately we're going to need to look at how can we create a new school that somehow changes the arrangement that has existed for these years that hasn't been as effective as it could have been. So I'm interested in that as well.
Okay.
Anything I haven't asked you that you want people to know about you? As a candidate, as a person?
Well, I think as a person, one of the things that I think is important is that you know that I'm very transparent around information, and that I'm very much interested in how people think and how people feel, and I'm very interested in being available for dialogue and discussion along the way. A big part of what I talk to people about is that if in fact I'm elected as your council person, I will not be an individual who, as a council person, is thinking that the ideas or what needs to happen are based solely on how I think about things. In fact, I'm going to actually make demands of the community itself. Right? I'm going to want them to show up. I'm going to want them to be engaged. I'm going to be involved. I'm a person that does not want to operate from a standpoint of thinking that I know what's best for the community. Mm-hmm. And so what I want the community to understand and what I want the district to understand, which is a very diverse district, is that I'm very much interested in marshaling what they think, in meeting their needs, particularly in the districts that's as flexible and as diverse as District 3. So that's what I'd like you to know, that I'm very transparent and open to dialogue and discussion and listening and bringing these eyes together so that we can have collective impact within the district itself.
That's what's up. That's what's up. So, again, remind everybody where you're running, what district you're running in, and how people can get in touch with you.
I'm running in District 3 in the city of New Rochelle for council person there. You can get in touch with me through Friends of David Peters via Facebook. And you can, and that's the best way actually to be able to reach me at this particular time. Okay. I'm very visible within the community, and I'm around quite a bit in the various churches and throughout the district in many ways. And I'm looking forward over the next 20 days to meet as many people as possible to talk a little bit about my candidacy and what I can bring to the table.
Well, we definitely thank you for coming through. We definitely wish you luck on your candidacy and your run. And if you win, we'd like to have you come back on and talk about, some of the situations, your first 100 days, what you want to do, and whatever issues there are in Rochelle, and come back through.
Because is there one last thing that I could say?
Oh, absolutely.
If at all possible.
Not a problem.
Part of what I want people to know about me is basically three things. That in my work within the city of New Rochelle, as a person that's been organizing within the community, there have been three things that I've brought to New Rochelle that have been institutionalized within New Rochelle, currently coming from that model that I'm describing. One is that I was able to bring my brother's keeper to New Rochelle. I brought that to our current council person. I brought that to the Board of Ed, and I initiated the discussions around the implementation of My Brother's Keeper within the city of New Rochelle.
I sat in those first meetings on Jared's invitation at the high school when all the groups came together, and before the mayor took the pledge and everything, I sat in.
Right,
in
but
those meetings, yeah.
prior to that, the whole idea of My Brother's Keeper, and that's why I'm mentioning it in terms of leading these efforts, was something that I brought to them and brought them together in order to initiate this process for that to happen. That's number one. The second thing in New Rochelle has been institutionalized primarily on the efforts, again, from the community impact in my engagement, has been around something that was called the Youth Police Initiative, which the city of New Rochelle decided to invest in, which was bringing together police officers and community leaders, training. I personally trained the community leaders and the police officers throughout the city of New Rochelle in creating a community policing model that was to be utilized throughout the city of New Rochelle and has been institutionalized there as well. The third thing that has been institutionalized, as I mentioned before, and this was with the school board, that I led efforts in relationship to returning to the Lincoln Avenue District school board meetings that had not occurred in the Lincoln Avenue District in District 3 for over 50 years. And the efforts of myself and others have now institutionalized that as part of the fabric of the city of New Rochelle. So the point that I'm making and the model that I'm describing and the work that I'm able to do and have demonstrated to be able to do is that the ideas and the implementation science around causing things to happen have been institutionalized in the city of New Rochelle from the outside already. So imagine the kind of work that I would be engaged in if I became council person for New Rochelle as well. So thank you for your time.
Definitely. Like I said, an open door. I'd like to see you
Absolutely.
come back after you win and continue this conversation.
Thank you very much.
Not a
Look
problem.
forward to it.
All right.
All
Yes,
right,
Brother
thank you.
Peters. Yes,
All right.
absolutely.
All
Good
right.
luck with everything.
Thank you.
That was New Rochelle City Council candidate David Peters running for City Council in District 3 with the seat currently held by Councilman Jared Rice, who is not running for re-election. We're going to move right into our second guest. Can the judge come in, please? Sure. There you go. How you doing, sir?
Good, how are you?
And I do not want to mispronounce your name, so I'm going to let
Alex Eisemann, I'll jump out.
Is say it again?
Eisemann.
Eisemann. Oh, I was saying Eisemann. Yeah, I already
Close
messed it
enough.
up. Yeah. So I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you for coming through. I think there are 4 candidates running for 2 seats.
Exactly, right.
Okay. So why are you one of the 2 candidates that should be elected in one of those 2 seats? And then you can pull your mic closer to you and
Sure.
talk right into it.
Well, I'm a progressive Democrat. I've been working on progressive causes my whole time as a lawyer for 25 years, more than 25 years, been representing indigent federal defendants. I was, in 2012, I was asked by the chair of the Westchester legislature, Ken Jenkins and Lyndon Williams and Pete Harcum, another member, to take on Rob Astorino, the former county executive,
Yes.
on some issues. The first one actually was not the child care case, which is the one I was probably most well known for. One was another one where he was abusing something called the Board of Acquisition and Contract. And it was a kind of a David and Goliath fight. Board wanted to change how Astorino was using it as a pocket veto to kill off progressive legislation. He overrode he vetoed the legislation that was supposed to prevent that. They overrode his veto, and he said, I'm still not going to do it. So they asked me to come in and to fight him and to try to get him to comply with the law, because the rule is generally, if you don't like the law, you comply with it until the judge says you can do something otherwise.
Right.
His approach was to say, I'm just going to do it, sue me if you don't like it. And then while that was going on, he wanted to raise the cost of child care. Again, the legislature had said you can't raise it more than 20%, the family share, the needy family share of that. And so Astorino vetoed that, and they overrode his veto, and he said, I'm going to do it anyway. So they asked me once again, can you jump in at the last minute to try to prevent him from doing that? And I got a temporary restraining order and kept that going the whole year, and he couldn't raise that. So I'm mentioning that because these are progressive causes I've worked on. And, as a judge, you're obviously going to follow the law. You're going to do the right thing. But there's a lot of discretion. You're a judge. You're judging things. You use judgment. So there are a lot of areas of the law where judicial candidates think, oh, I can't really talk about this. They think they're paralyzed by the ethics of running for a judge, but it's really not true. You can say a lot. You just can't say as a judge, I'm going to do X.
Right.
But there are things like we're losing rights in Washington, right? And we have a state constitution. If I'm sworn into office, I'm going to be sworn to uphold both the federal constitution and the state constitution. If there is a right that's weakened in Washington, whether through presidential executive action or through the Supreme Court overruling something, you have the right as a state court judge to say, I'm finding this under the state constitution and define it that way too. So I'm talking substance like that, and we live in an era where this kind of active judging, I'm not calling it activist, but active judging to try to do something about what's going on in society is important. And I bring those things to the table, both with my experience and my background and my skills. And I think that those are qualities that voters will want.
One of the things in Black Westchester we've covered extensively is criminal justice reform, and one of the things that we've told people that one of the most important positions you can vote for is that the judge position. I know that they've passed a few criminal justice reforms in the new budget item. Where do you stand on criminal justice reform?
Those are fantastic. New York was in the dark ages for a long time. The misdemeanor bail, I assume that your listeners are familiar with this somewhat.
Yes. We've talked about it extensively.
Okay.
Yeah.
So really that shouldn't have to be into a law. That is a judicial discretion. There are good judges make those kind of decisions, but it's good because judges cover in all shapes and sizes. It's good to have guidelines. It's good to have the judges who are going to be outliers in misdemeanor bail know that it shouldn't be appropriate in most cases, except if there's a history of bench warrants not coming up to court. People who have violence, it could be violent. If they're charged with a violent crime, it could go out and do that again. So there are reasons to set bail in cases, but precious few in a misdemeanor because most people don't get jail time in misdemeanor cases and they come to court. The discovery, it used to be that, it's still not fully in effect, but it was that you would, if you're going to trial, you wouldn't know what the witness said until the witness is about to get on the stand. They're in the hallway, literally coming in the courtroom. You're handed the witness statement. You look at it and you say, oh, wow, I didn't know that. I would have investigated that. Well, that actually looks like a defense, but you're going to trial. You can't do it then and there. So other states have open file discovery. New York has come very close to that now by just saying that those witness statements are given over very early on in the process, so you can actually do a thorough job.
Right.
And whether you're a prosecutor or you're a defense attorney or you're a judge, you want to see justice done. That means all the facts come out on the table. And with this criminal justice reform, they are coming out on the table, and it's a very progressive and good thing that finally brings New York in line with the more progressive states around the nation. Right.
And so there was the cash bail, that was one. There was several other items that
It was the primary ones of the discovery and cash bail. They're doing something with speedy trial as well.
Right.
Generally, most defendants think of that as a windfall. It is important to get. It is important to go to trial quickly. And I've had clients who are affected by a slow trial process where witnesses die, people's memories fade, and often your defense is lost. Very often, it's a windfall for the defendants who are often responsible for the delays. But those things should be harmonized. There should be common sense in the whole speedy trial aspect of that.
Right. I did want to add that one of the most significant aspects of the speedy trial issue is that detaining a person has a coercive impact and is likely to make them to plea instead of taking the full trial, even if they deem themselves to be innocent.
There's that, because it's hard to put a defense together when you're in jail.
Sure.
And bail is designed to help people assist their counsel in putting together a defense. It's hard for, judges are human beings. If someone is a defense attorney, which I am right now, I can tell you that it is a goal to get a person out on bail, because someday when they're being sentenced, if they plead guilty or they're convicted after trial, to walk in the courtroom and say to a judge, I'm living my life, I'm living it well outside, I'm doing right by society, I've learned my lesson, go ahead and put me in jail if you think that's going to help me. Judges are human. They don't want to put you in jail if you're out. So whether that is, a principled statement or not, it's the reality of how judges react to the fact that someone they're facing is in jail. It's easier to say you're going to stay in jail than it is to say you're going to put you in jail. So strategically, it's something that defense attorneys want to do to get someone out.
Mm-hmm.
As a judge, it's not going to make a difference to me. It doesn't make a difference to me because I dig deep into what's going on in a person's background, and I don't just look at it and say, what's the easy way out? I was a law clerk to a federal judge, and I have experience at just assessing things just on the merits, not because of some external factor like whether they're in jail at that moment.
Do you think the new reforms went far enough, or do you think there's more that needs to be done, and how do you feel about that?
Well, those reforms I think did go far enough. You know, now the Democrats are in control of the governor's house, the Senate, and the Assembly,
right.
And so they passed stuff which were important reforms which were not being passed for many years. There are other things that could be done. We could reform mandatory minimums, which are still a tragic thing. When people are charged with a high enough crime that they have to go to jail, tying the judge's hands. Again, this is the kind of thing that shouldn't require legislation to say, Judge, you need to give an appropriate sentence. Good judges should be able to do that on their own. And for 200 years of our nation's history, they did that until mandatory minimums came into vogue in the 1980s, and they're still federally, especially, and in New York, there are mandatory minimums that should be done away with. There are immigration reforms that are needed. This is federal, but there are a couple of things going on. You know about ICE showing up at the courthouses
Yes.
and taking people away. At least I've thought about this issue as whether there's a sort of a states' right aspect to this, that the federal government is coming and interfering with someone who's under the process of a state court, and whether state judges really do have a power to try to prevent someone from being arrested and affecting the course of their case. I don't know the answer to that yet, but it's an issue that's in my mind. Congress in 1996 passed something called IRA is the acronym for it, where they took away hardship relief for anyone who's convicted of something called an aggravated felony, which is defined under the federal statutes. That can include misdemeanors. So they took away hardship relief that normally would be applied to someone who has been convicted of a crime, aggravated felony, who is otherwise a lawful permanent resident of the United States, and the federal government now could just deport them. There's no defense to it. There is no hardship relief for someone convicted of an aggravated felony. That can be reformed because
Wait, so if you're a green card carrier or a resident?
Green card carrier.
Okay.
If you're not a citizen.
Right.
If you're a citizen, you're insulated from it. But if you are convicted of, let's say, a minor drug offense, it's a felony. Okay, all the drug offenses are defined as aggravated felonies. So the federal government will start removal proceedge on you while you're in jail or when you get out.
I dealt with a little bit of that. I used to be a hip hop journalist, music journalist for a while. The legendary rapper Slick Rick was, he was I guess a green card carrying member, but lived here all his life. Raised his family here and everything. But then when he committed the felony and he went to jail, actually they didn't get him. They didn't send him out of the country. He performed on a ship, one of those ships, and once it left the U.S. with Tom Joyner cruise, once it left the U.S., they got him for illegally sneaking back in when he got off the boat, saying that he deported himself. Right.
That's a nice.
So he had to.
That George W. Bush said that.
Yeah. So he had to fight that for like over a year. He's free. He won. But I mean, that's when I first came upon that. He lived here all his life, knows everything here. His kids know it, and
Well, that was Congress in its wisdom, thinking that the way to deal with the problem of people committing crimes when they're residents of this country is to just send them off. And you get people who have never lived in the country. I had a client who was from Colombia. He left there when he was 6 months old, didn't speak Spanish, lived here his whole life, was a hardworking guy. He had some financial problems. He ended up getting involved in the drug business on some level. He pled guilty to it, and he was married to a woman who grew up in Long Island. They had kids here. He was threatened with deportation, and I at the last minute, really running to court in Newark, New Jersey, which is where the immigration facilities were, got a temporary restraining order just as they were about to take him to the airport, and kept that going, and finally got a case decided in the federal appeals court that covers New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania to change the law because in that circuit, which is the Third Circuit, the government was not allowed to deport people to countries where there was violence if the person who's being deported could show that the violence is sanctioned by the government down there. So in Colombia, there's violence, but it's not sanctioned by the government. Those are rebel groups. So So I looked at something called the Convention Against Torture, found that there was some authority saying that the idea that if the government is turning a blind eye to the violence down there, that should be enough to prevent the removal of the person to that country. And I fought that, one in the district court level, one in the Court of Appeals, and he actually got his hardship relief, which had been taken away from him because he had the aggravated felony. So he was able to stay here.
What do you feel now? I know you can't speak on any specific thing, or even what you would do. I guess you can't speak on.
Try me. I might be able to speak on it.
There's been some local issues, local cases where black individuals have been killed by the police, and the judge refused to, prosecute them and do anything, and no justice was brought, and these families have been fighting for justice for several years. I mean, that's not just a county situation. That's a national situation. But we've had a couple of incidents here in this county as well. Right. Can you speak on any as far as I didn't mention specific cases. That's why just go ahead.
Or what would you do in your capacity as a trial court judge, for example, where you had to hear one of these rather controversial cases in which there was the death of a civilian?
The easy answer to that is that I would be fair and impartial. But that doesn't tell you a whole lot.
Right. But that's usually what I get. That's all I get. Yeah.
But that's what would be guiding me, because I'll answer that question fully in a second. But when I was a law clerk to a federal judge, it was the best job I ever had, because all I was doing was going to work, trying to do the right thing every day. So what's the right thing? Well, that's a little bit of slippery slope. To one judge, the right thing might be one thing, and one to the other. You always have to remember that in this case, you are an umpire calling balls and strikes. And I don't agree with the Chief Justice saying that about everything. But in this case, where it's a very close call, often, depending on which perspective you have, to the police who say, I can't take a chance, with anybody who's doing something, I could be killed, I have to overreact. They would say that. And to the community who says, come on, like Amadou Diallo, it's a wallet, not a gun.
Right.
It's something I think ultimately has to be put in the hands of a jury, not a judge, because you're going to have to get a consensus. You're going to have to get a majority vote on something like that. They're not easy questions sometimes. Sometimes it's easy. Some of the cases that have been in the news are simple. That the police officer's done wrong. Other ones are harder. And it really, for a judge to make that decision, if I have to do it, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to apply the law in that case. But I think a jury doing that, a grand jury doing it in the initial instance, and a jury doing that, is the way to let the community have input into it. And if the community thinks that what the cops did are wrong, and the case law supports that, then the police officer should be convicted. And if not, the police officer should be acquitted. It's not easy.
It's funny that you said that, because a lot of these situations, since they don't go to court, there's no case law. You know what I'm saying? Like there might be a settlement or something. But I know a lot of the African American community has a very big distrust in the legal system as a whole. When you see situations like where cops say, they feel for their life, there have been situations in New York State. One incident was a terrorist. He was a terrorist. He planted the bomb. They knew he was a terrorist. They were looking for him. They only found him because they was clearing this area and he was sleeping in his car. They were knocking on the window. He thought they had him. He then fired on the police officers. If the cops got any reason to shoot you, then he was taken alive. The guy who went into the church, all those, they were taken alive. Unarmed black men with no weapon are just dead. You know what I'm saying? So that's all. There's a lot. There's not a lot of trust in the black community.
We don't have Jim Crow laws right now, but there's a legacy in our country of fear of the white community, of police officers, of the black community, hostility, and President Trump would say it works both ways, but the community's reaction to the police is often caused by the police's approach to the community. So integrating, and this is not my area of expertise, but integrating officers from the community from which they come is a good way to start with that, and training of officers. But at that moment where the officer fears for his life, officers come in all shapes and sizes too. You can train them as much as you want, but there's going to be some who are skittish, there'll be some who are racist, some who are too slow and they could be killed. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very difficult area, and all you can do is do the best you can do, looking at the law about what it means to be criminally negligent, what it means to be reckless, and as a judge, try to apply that. A judge, by the way, will be called upon, even if it's a jury trial. There'll be a motion by the judge made for the judge to dismiss the case after the people have rested their prosecution case, on the theory that the evidence doesn't rise to the level of a crime.
Right.
And I'll be called upon to make those kind of decisions. The most cautious approach is to let that go to a jury. But there'll be times that even I will be looking at the evidence and say, it's just not there. There's no reason why this officer, just like any other person in a courtroom, shouldn't face a jury verdict when the evidence just is not there. But it's a prudent thing to let it go to the jury and decide it afterwards, because it's like it or not, it's politically charged to take that case from the jury if they could actually decide it on their own.
Another community that hasn't always gotten a fair shake, and probably was the birth of the Me Too movement. Women's sexual harassment and all that. That seems to be, I don't know how big that is in Westchester County, but I mean that's prevalent everywhere.
Seems to be big everywhere as far as I can tell.
Any thoughts or anything that you can add as far as from being a judge perspective on sexual harassment and that whole thing?
Women are a protected minority under the Constitution, just like people of color are under race, and women have been subject to discrimination. I've never been a woman.
Right.
But, I'm aware enough of how life works to know that women are subject to incredible harassment, and it's almost taken for granted in some circles. We have a president that doesn't have a particularly good example on that front, but those laws need to be applied aggressively and fairly, both aggressively and fairly, to try to change how society views how they can treat women at the same time.
Is there anything that I've asked you some questions I wanted to ask that I didn't ask you that you wanted to speak on, any topics or?
Yeah, I actually had a list so I could make sure I answered this question. I wouldn't just know. As a judge, I once had somebody tell me, and I've always repeated it, that in the world there are happy judges and there are angry judges. Angry judges tend to, when they have something unexpected thrown at them, they're not ready for it. They get angry. They're upset with the people in the courtroom. I'd be a happy judge, because the fact that I don't know what's going to happen is what's going to make the job interesting to me. So anything can come at me. I have a history of in let's say in criminal cases, multi-defendant cases. You get 12 defendants all on trial. They have different defenses. They're stepping on each other. I tend to be the conciliator in there. I tend to be the person who thinks through how can all harmonize this together. So I like it. I like the challenge of it. It makes me want to get up every day to go to work, not only do the right thing, but to have a challenge about what's going on. I am patient. I did a lot of, for many years was doing court-appointed work in the federal courts. I'm patient with my clients. I'm patient with judges and adversaries. Judges would actually seek me out when they had a difficult client, somebody that is just not handling their case right, is interfering with what the lawyer wants them to do. And the lawyer generally has good sense, not always. And so I have that history. And I want to be a judge to give people the experience, in addition to doing things like protecting our rights that we're losing in Washington, and hopefully through this primary, reforming the process by which we select judicial candidates. But I want to be able to have people have the experience in front of me as a judge that I want to have. A judge that's down the middle, a judge that's listening to you, a judge that's engaged, a judge that is as smart at least as the lawyers are in the room, and a judge that's working very hard to try to do the right thing. I think great judges do that, and I want to be a great judge.
If anybody hearing you, seeing you for the first time, want to know more about you, websites, social media, how they get in touch with you?
My website is my name, alexeisemann.com, AlexEisemann.com.
Mm-hmm.
On Facebook, it's Alex Eisemann for County Court. As other guests have said, there's a big contribute button there. I can't ask for contributions, but races are expensive, and you can't win a race if you're not getting contributions. So,
right.
If anyone wants to contribute, I won't say no. So I'm not asking for them.
Now, judges don't really have debates, right? You don't have like a judge debate.
We do. This whole idea that judicial candidates can't talk substance is not really right. I mean, but it's easy for a judicial candidate to say, I can't talk about this. It happens whether it's in the Supreme Court level in Washington, D.C., or even here. The world's sort of separated into three zones in terms of what your ethics are as a judicial candidate. You can talk about anything you've ever done in the past. You can actually talk about the issues of the day. I can tell you I don't like President Trump or his policies. I just can't say as a judge I'm going to do something.
Okay.
But I can tell you what I would consider doing. Things that like this issue about whether you move things to the state constitution. If there is a right that we consider ingrained in our fabric of society, let's say racial profiling, that's not allowed under the federal constitution. But suppose the Supreme Court decides that that's allowed. I'm not deciding it here, and I'm not sure. I'm not saying I will come out that way. But if there's authority and there's a basis to call that a fundamental right to be free from that kind of profiling, and that right can be found under the state constitution, I'm prepared to do that. I'll hear the sides of all the briefs of both sides. I'll consider it, but that's a power I know I have, and it's a power I'm willing to exercise in an appropriate case. So you can press judicial candidates. You can press me. I'll tell you where the limit is.
Well, I do, and since you're there, I have one more question for
Sure.
you. Can't speak specifically, but I've seen it not just in the city of Mount Vernon, but in some of the other municipalities where, say, like a city of Mount Vernon, there's a charter situation, and the two forms of government, the mayor and the city council, can't come to an agreement, and they take it to court. I've seen a lot of those situations where these things are being fought out of court where it's clearly written in charters and stuff. I guess you would see some of that if you were elected.
One of the things I'll be asked to do is to do Article 78, which is
Article 78, yes.
which is the way that if you have a public official who's not doing something he or she's supposed to do, or is doing something they shouldn't be doing, and Article 78 is the way to challenge it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I would be hearing those cases. I couldn't tell you about which one I'd be hearing or what I would do on it, but there's a process for deciding those things. That case I did with Astorino, childcare, and this Board of Acquisition and Contract, they were both Article 78 cases, and we used that. My clients were the Democratic members of the legislature. We used that to be able to force him to comply with the law that they had set down.
Mm-hmm.
One, as a longtime activist, one issue that I'm curious to see how you, what your stance might be, would be the use of, we'll call it extra institutional measures on the part of protesters at a time when the nation seems to be embroiled in a deep crisis to try to, advance a progressive agenda. As you well know, one of the tried and true tactics of organizers, activists, is to create disruption. And very often the courts have looked rather dimly on some of the tactics that have been used. And the reason I asked this is because actually when I was a City University student and protester, one of the defenses that we invoked after we took over the buildings in the City University for 3 weeks was a kind of, I can't remember the technical,
Civil
but
disobedience.
yeah, and this was like a last resort. We didn't have any other kind of recourse. And at the time, it seemed somewhat novel. It was actually put forth by our defense attorney, Ronald McGuire, who's made a name for himself in progressive circles, been affiliated with the Lawyers Under Law. Yeah, I'm sure you know what that is, New York Under Law. In any case, I'm curious about what position might you take towards progressive protesters, or conservative protesters for that matter, who go outside the bounds of normal institutional condone institutional practices in order to try to advance their agenda. For example, I mean, it is arguable that humanity, it's inarguable that humanity is not confronting an existential crisis in the form of global climate warming, and in my mind, the long-term consequences justify use of a lot of unusual tactics. I'd be curious to,
Well, for the first instance, those charging decisions are within the discretion of the district attorney's office here in Westchester. You would hope that District Attorney Scarpino would be sensitive to the idea that people are trying to exercise what's often a First Amendment right, and maybe they technically violate a law. Whether you don't have to charge everybody who's violated a crime, who has committed a crime with an offense. I mean, everyone who has violated a statute doesn't have to be charged with a crime. So you would hope that he would exercise discretion and not do that. If he charges them, here's an area where I can't talk about what I would do, but there is an aspect of the discretion given to judges to have sort of interest of justice kind of dismissals of cases.
Yeah.
All I can say is that, is that I will, I know that is out there, and I know it's something that there's case law. It's not just the wild, wild west and you just decide, I think I'm going to dismiss this case.
Right.
But if it's appropriate, then I would dismiss it. If it's not, I wouldn't. And I don't know I can go any further than that.
Okay.
But you know what?
But you would be receptive
Well,
to the
yeah,
defense.
of course. You know what? But every judge should be. Of course I would be. Because as a judge, you should be receptive to everything.
Right.
Everything that's within the law, you should do. It shouldn't matter that I happen to have a progressive background. Just like if someone came before me and they're conservative, they're a landlord, where my heart right now is a progressive with the tenant, the landlord's entitled to have the law applied fairly too.
Right.
Judges, they put their thumbs on the scale sometimes to try to work it out. It's an extended negotiation in that kind of situation where the person's going to be thrown out. The landlord wants the tenant out. The tenant looks like they might recover. Judges tend to sort of work the process to help, because they are human, to help the person who's going to be thrown out. But it really you should be as fair as you can be. You should try to take that part of you, take it off your shoulder, that little person that's whispering to me and say, you've got a progressive background, and say, my job is to be fair in upholding the law and applying the law, but I'm not going to forget that person is on my shoulder. I'm not going to forget, what people who don't have the ability to get representation, that they have rights too, and they need their story told. So does the landlord. So does the prosecutor. But that's my job. That's the beauty of being that. And I'll add one thing. Because I'm old enough, I don't have to run for re-election. So federal judges are given lifetime tenure, so they don't have to worry about the impact of their decision. They can just be impeached. People who are running for judge for this 10-year term, who are going to face election, the day they're elected, they know 10 years from now they're going to be elected. And so their decisions, rightly or wrongly, as human beings, again, everyone's going to try not to do it. They're going to have that in their mind. I'm freed from that. I can do exactly what I think is the right thing. I'm not accountable to anybody if I win this election, and I will just try to do the right thing.
Any last words?
Please come out and vote. Even if you're not in a community like Mount Vernon, which has a hotly contested race, or even in Yonkers, which has a contested race. I'm not sure how hotly contested it is. Please come out and vote. And if you hear my message and you think in this day and age that we need judges who are going to think like I am on the bench, and we're going to make a bench that's capable of protecting our rights, the same way that New York State has, that the governor has, just on some levels, then please come out and vote. Even if you don't care about the other races, come out. We're first on the ballot. There's a good reason for that, not just because of the fact that we're a countywide race. Judges are very important, and they're more important nowadays than they've been in the past. So
Absolutely.
please come out and vote. And no penalty if they want to vote for me. I'll take their votes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, we thank you for coming and wish you well in your election.
Thanks very much.
And we're going to get into our third and final guest, former Mayor Ernie Davis. Can come into the studio, please.
Okay. Here we go. The kick. I don't even know. Mayor Davis, how are you today, brother? Good to see you, man. How's everything?
Good.
Larry doesn't want to come on? No. You can join us.
You want to join us? Okay.
Baby, you family, man. Come on, man.
So we have the man in the building.
Want to blow you up?
Well, once again, let me give you a round of applause. There you go. Pull your mic close to you, sir. All right. Yes. So, several things. Man, there's so many things I want to talk to you about. First, a lot of people have questions about you being on the ballot, not being on the ballot. So, can you clear that up? We'll start right there and just clear that up for people.
Okay. The short answer is no. We're not. We were on. We had row 5, and they.
You had the number and everything, yeah.
Yeah. And then they decided that I didn't have it. So we appealed that decision. I went to court, lost in court. And the reason was that all of the information was not submitted in a timely manner when we were in court. So it's one of those snafus. We had over 900 and something,
Valid signature.
ballot signatures that we had researched. If I were younger, I would be going crazy, but since I'm not, so we trying to focus on what the next step should be. One thing is that we won't give up. We think that despite all of the things that we've been faced with, and this is the toughest challenge I've had. I can't even get not from the opponents, but some opponents, but the opponents that you don't normally see. And what it does is it looks at, what is it, power corrupts, absolute power.
Right.
Corrupts absolutely.
Yeah.
And we saw this play out, and I think I was put in this position to challenge that. I was in the sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina, and hundreds of years later, I'm fighting something else. So there's always a fight, and we're gonna fight.
Now, full disclosure. So I've said it to you last time you were here. I'm working on a book, and in my book, I describe you as probably the Muhammad Ali of black politics, like probably the greatest that ever did it. When you lost to Clinton, everybody thought you was knocked out, but you had one more rope of dope. But honestly, my concern was, like Ali, you might be sticking your head out one too many times. Ali said, "Well, I can come back again." And then he got knocked out by his sparring partner.
Yeah, but he wouldn't have known that unless he tried.
Well, that's definitely true.
I think people look at age, they look at how many times I've done it, and that's not the essence of the conversation. And we were saying that who can do this better? That's the issue. We are in a terrible situation, as you well know. And,
absolutely.
And it's
that's an understatement.
Right. And it just gets worse and worse. And this is not on-the-job training. I came in office right after Blackwood. We were in terrible shape then. We ushered it through. I worked 12 years, and we had a $26 million surplus. And I lost to Clinton Young. And one of the big reasons is that they brought in the FBI. That issue in dirty politics. Clinton Young, that election, before that, people would run against each other, but after it was over, it was over.
Mm-hmm.
But this left a distasteful taste in my mouth, and he is back at it again. He is with Reggie and Lyndon and Clyde Eisemann, and they are doing something I think that should not be done. So as long as if my lips are sealed, then nobody knows about it. And the other thing is that
are you going to unseal your lips on the show today, Man Davis?
Oh yeah, that's
Okay,
what I'm here.
all right. We want to hear what this is.
Now, see, I have an obligation. People say, "Well, you're old, you're on the stage." One thing, especially black people, I was reading some quotes. It's easier to raise a child, than to rebuild an old man.
That's right.
And so I believe that. I believe that we have lost, and I'm talking about black people now, not other people I don't know. But tears come to my eyes when I think about my grandparents who loved me and cared for me and set an example for me, my mother and father, and all of that. And if you look at the dilemma that we face as black folks is that in too many cases that's missed. And that allows us to be disrespectful of our elders, and disrespectful of understanding that you don't stand here alone. You stand here because somebody made a difference. And I looked at, I brought up the sit-ins in Greensboro, North Carolina. I was 20 years old in my last year in college, and when it happened. But I do remember when I was 11 years old, my dad took me to a game in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they were playing, the white team was playing the Baltimore Eli Giants, a black team, and white people came out and, they just wanted to see this superior black team. They made no correlation between the superior black team and black people who went to see it. So we were ushered to the bullpen area. And my dad, we talked the next day, and I was 11 years old, and I said, my dad said, Tojo, that's what he used to call me. He said, how did you like the game? I said, I'm never going to go back again. So he looked at me quizzically, and he says, I said, I'm not an animal. I won't be treated this way. And he looked at me, and he says, son, that's why we're sending you to college. You'll live in a different world. And so that spirit is still in me. I don't look at the mayor the way a lot of people look at it. They want to bring attention to themselves or whatever. It's a tough job. But unless you realize that you are the servant leader, it's going to be about you, or you think it's about you. But if you take it seriously, and if you look at your community and you see the needs of those communities, you won't have time to run through the streets with lights blaring, run on over red lights, disrespecting people. You won't do that. And I'm afraid that people, especially in a younger generation, have not quite put this together the way they should. So when people, I would say, I'm an architect, and when I was in office, there was one other mayor in the whole United States of America was an architect. Architects sees the world differently than an average politician, and that's why we had so much success, is because we know that we try to build environments for the people. For instance, when I go down the street, I look at paper in the streets, I look at sidewalks not being kempt, I look at sidewalks that's uneven, that somebody's going to trip and fall over. I look at trees necessary for the community. I look at, I correlate all of those to see how people will feel. If you walk into a junky house, you're going to feel a certain way, but if you walk into one...
Clean house, yeah.
So that's the same way as your community. And you won't get that community unless you expect that you will. And so there's no time for all this bravado if you look at the needs of your community. And I'm going to go again to black people. When I say black people, I'm talking about African Americans. We celebrate what the enemy says more than we do what we say.
Absolutely.
And that's that slave mentality that we have. In Mount Vernon, it plays out. The only thing that we can seem to agree on is something negative. And so my voice has to be heard, because you're not going to hear it from any of the candidates that's out there. They don't understand it. They haven't put it all together. So, for instance, I had more signatures than anybody else. But mine was called out, and we had to bring people in, and still they're fighting to keep me from talking. I find that the community should be in uproar because somebody has misused their power. Why would you do that? Because you think that the ingredient with me in it compromises what they want to do. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. And for me, I have nothing to gain. I've been the mayor more than anybody else. I'm in the advanced age where I don't care too much what you say, but I do care what I do. And I do care that this community is not living up to its creed because it's made some bad choices. How do you take a young man that's never had a real job and put him to run your city? So right off, you made a bad choice. And then right off, your enemies saw that you made a bad choice, and they took advantage of it, and that's what's happening.
I know. And when all this stuff started to go down, I know it was part of you had to be like, "Yeah, how you like me now?" Like,
Yeah. Well,
like,
I part of it, yeah.
I mean, that's only human.
Yeah. I'm saying, of all the people, I could see Ruth Thompson. I don't think she's been great, but she wouldn't have been nothing like this because her age would not permit her to do some of the stupid things that. I mean, the latest thing is that you're having a press conference because you got no gas, and you're blaming the controller for it. And
now, let me ask you. Okay,
yeah.
As former mayor, you over DBW and all those things and everything.
Right.
Now I'm so ignorance is what you don't know. So I'm asking questions what I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I know in the car you got a gas tank and it tells you when it's I know on your oil thing, on your house there's usually there's a thing. Is there no thing that tells you when you're low? Is there's no format I've never heard of this happening before, so how did y'all know when y'all were getting low on gas and you needed to order some more? I mean, what was the process before?
The first thing you got to do is have the commissioner, like Thomas Sharp made me the building commissioner, and he says, nobody can tell you what to do. And I don't know what to tell you, because if I could run it, I wouldn't need you. So you got to go back to who's running DPW.
Okay.
I mean, you got trash. You got a gas. We have our own gas out there, right? And you always check and see how much gas you got. So I don't know how you run out.
Because I heard it's supposed to, once you get close to 2,000 gallons or something, you're supposed to order more, and they're now down to 400. So somebody evidently missed that. So
and it goes back to relationships also. Now, from what I've been told, that the controller does not trust the mayor, and therefore she went and tried to take his name off stuff because he was writing checks. For instance, according to what I was told, he wrote a $93,000 check to, you see those red trucks?
Red trucks. That
he wrote on his own. He went and wrote a check for $93,000. Now,
well, I have a problem. I have a problem with that too. If I said this earlier, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I've been saying this several times in the last. I see these red trucks come by. I see after they had the accident. I see the press conference that said basically that we don't have money to pay for the parts. We don't have money to pay for service. So where we got $93,000 to pay for lease trucks? We could have used that. That could have fixed some trucks, right? That could have brought the parts, right? I mean, that's just.
You would think.
Unless I'm not looking at this the right way, or I'm on the outside looking in, or something. I'm missing something.
This is what's been told to me. This whole thing about the truck. That truck was not supposed to be on the road.
And wasn't on the road before that day.
Right.
Okay, that's what I was told.
So somebody made the decision, put the truck out there, right? So now you got the truck out there, and you got problems with trucks. Somebody could have been killed. So now you want to cover all this stuff up, saying all the trucks are bad. I went down there, and I saw the trucks lined up, looked fine to me. And so this mayor has riled up the DPW into a frenzy where it becomes not about what really happened to cover up for the trucks, but it was somebody else's fault. Now, if you are the mayor of the city, all of this is your fault. You might not have done it yourself. You might not even know what was happening. But the people,
The buck stops with you.
the buck stops here.
And I interrupt you one more time. My problem, this is me personally. I covered the stories when you were mayor. They weren't all favorable, always, but I covered the stories when you were mayor and he was city councilman. And my problem is the level that he held your feet to the fire, expectations. He expects nobody's supposed to do that to him.
Well, yeah, chickens come home to roost, right? He was trying to get me out of office.
He called the feds to investigate the mayor's office, and
Right.
they did come.
Right.
Now,
Right.
I mean, that
And Clinton did the same thing. And they're the one and two worst mayors that we've ever had. Because they have, and I told Clinton when I was running against him, why are you doing all of this for a job you can't do? And he was the worst mayor until I think Rich is by far the worst, but it's very dangerous, and I think the community has to learn from that. You have to make an informed decision. Now you can never guess what somebody actually is going to do,
right.
but you use your best judgment. Some things you know not to do.
And I wanted to say, that brings me to my favorite quote of all times, speaking about Spezio. And he was like, there's just some people you don't take money from. Like, that's my all-time favorite quote.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I say to people, I say, look, you're 32 years old. Somebody has elevated you higher than you should be. And I don't care how, in most cases, if people haven't gone through the fire, they don't know it's hot. And but Spezio is a businessman. Can't blame him. He sees an opportunity to take advantage of some situations. He can see, he knew this kid didn't have any experience. I mean, if you're older, you know that. You know this kid, he might sound smart to people who don't know. But he knew that. And so when you put something out there and you take the bait, then guess what? It's over. Even if you want to do right.
Right. I agree.
So when you've been around a long time, you say, hey, yo, bro. Somebody said, and this is appropriate, he says, people would come to him all the time with these great ideas, going to make some money, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said, that sounds very good. He said, but if this doesn't work, will we go to jail? Say, unless you can tell me we ain't going to jail if this stuff don't work, then get the hell out of here. I ain't doing no stuff like that. But when you're young, and that's if you really want to do the right thing. You're impetuous. You haven't looked at the consequences of your behavior. But I think there's some other stuff that has to be going on that requires mental rehabilitation.
I'm not, and I just want to say something too about age, because I don't think you can rule somebody out because they're too old and you can't, sometimes too young. But the age thing, if he had surrounded himself with knowledgeable people, a lot of people go into a job that they don't really know, and
Right.
you surround yourself with knowledgeable people who have been there and know what's up. Advisors, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody goes into the presidency knowing how to run the country. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But you have advisors. And I thought that if he had the right advisors around him, that was, again, before the primary and before I knew there was a Joe Spezio, I thought that he could do good. And that honestly was my...
Well, I
my
could have
thing.
told you. He
No,
could
you
do
did
that.
tell me. No, I admitted on the video.
But because I watched it, and don't forget, I knew it since he was a kid.
Well, you told me that.
And
after that, too.
I was hoping for. There's nothing that I would rather seen him do well. But I met with him after he won. He said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Of course." And he came over, and we met 4 times, and we talked about a lot of stuff. I talked about a lot of stuff. He listened, and I said, the people who helped you get elected might not be the ones that you can have in your administration. And I pointed out, I won't say it here, but I pointed out some people that you have to be very careful about. I also told him that, remember, you're
I'm sure my name was on that list somewhere.
No, it wasn't. I would have told you.
Well, I'm going to say this: for the most part, the mayor took your advice.
but you know, he didn't say anything. I said, and I called the names, and a couple of names he said, there's nothing he could do about that. I said, just remember, you're the reason that they are here, but they will be the reason that you leave if you don't do something about it. So, but the interesting thing is that he keeps doing it. I mean, you know, I would say you get in trouble, you touch the stove and you see it's hot, you don't touch it again, right? Not him. He just keeps doing that. And the thing that hurts me high on the list is we had this African Kayla, very decent man. He was teaching our children tennis free and all of that. And I'm happy to have met him. And he was celebrated by the United Tennis Federation. And we got him to manage the tennis. And in the dead of night, this mayor took the police.
As a personal Gestapo.
Yeah. And the other thing is he's got it on tape.
You know, because Kayla said to me 3 o'clock in the morning that day.
It's 12
But what do you
o'clock.
do? No, but I'm saying I was out there.
Yeah,
I came
yeah.
out there like 12:30,
Okay.
and I was out there till at least 3.
Okay.
And he said, Janelle picked me up and brought me. And he said, what do you do when it's the police blocking you from going in as people are violating your rights?
Yeah.
I really didn't have an answer for him. I was like, yeah. I mean, like, it was just, you could see the pain in his face. Like, that's who I should be able to call if somebody's violating.
Right.
But it's the
You would
police
think.
preventing me from getting in.
Yeah.
And that, yeah.
I mean, and look what we have now. They go in and they tear down the bubble. That bubble is $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And they scouted the place, and then to see what wires they're going to cut that caused the bubble to collapse, and that's what did it. And one of them was a fireman on probation. I mean,
Figueroa.
how do you do stuff like that? And I don't understand how the forces that be let that go on for this long.
But I know, Bob, you have a question or two you wanted to ask real quick.
Well, I mean, I wanted to reel us back and return to topic that is more immediately related to the mayor's race, and specifically the circumstances under which Mayor Davis's petition to ballot for the mayor's offices this cycle wasn't validated. I wanted to hear more about that. There are a whole nest of issues that are involved. Perhaps just the first and foremost issue raises how a petition that has nearly 3,000 signatures is invalidated, and whether or not it was anti-democratic, and whether the invalidation of the signatures was actually was fair.
I'll start with the first one. No, it was not fair. But let's set the stage. You got Clinton Young, who was the objector, and you have Clinton's sister who works at the board of elections, and Mary's also the treasurer of the local Democratic Party. Now, I think doesn't require a lot of imagination. And then Reggie is supporting Clyde Eisemann.
And he's the Mount Vernon City Chair, the Westchester County Chair, and the Westchester County Board of Election.
Right.
Democratic Commission.
Right.
The Democratic Commission, yeah.
So he has all of this power in his hand to do good or to do not so good. And my petitions were singled out, and I hired an expert in this, and we found that there were a lot of people that they had was not registered. They were actually registered. Now, why did the judge rule against me? Well, we had legal representation. They were going after Larry McDowell's signatures because they said that his signature was not his signature. So he was put on the stand and he swore that this is his signature. I mean, signatures are very strange things. I mean, when I was a building commissioner, I signed my name one way, but because all of the things I had to sign, I developed another type of signature. So signatures change. Sometimes people deliberately change them, but I change them because of circumstance. So the board cannot rule on signatures. They're not experts.
Just real quick, we had a White Plains young lady running for city council in White Plains, Catherine Bresler, and she did this on Facebook. She showed, covering information, but she showed the signature on her driver's license, and when she first signed her card, and 20 years later, what it looks like now.
Right.
She's like, don't even look like the same person, does
right.
it? Yeah,
right.
she posted them up Facebook, side by side.
Yeah, and so
she's ironically, she's having problems fighting this to get on the ballot right now too.
Oh yeah,
signatures. That has nothing to do with anything, but ironically, I just tell you example.
Well, there's a similarity, and there were a lot of signatures that McDowell signed. So they went after that. They figured if they can knock those off, they knock me off. So we went up to the board and spent about maybe a couple of weeks up there, just going through the buff cards and all that. So we had the goods. So what happened? The lawyer put too much emphasis on McDowell's signatures, and he had about 800 or so that they researched and found that the board said were not registered, but in fact the buff cards showed they had been registered. So we lost a case that we should not have lost, because down in the Supreme Court, those signatures and that information was not submitted. And so when we went to have it appealed, that followed into the appeal and say, you didn't put it in.
Oh, you couldn't.
And
You
so
couldn't. It wasn't an appealable issue.
right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they ruled. So here we are. And so why would I want to do this? Some people say, oh, give somebody else a chance. I want to smack people when they say that. You give people chances.
He said,
No,
I
I'm
said
messing with you,
that.
man.
I'm saying,
I'm messing with you.
saying this is nowhere in the world. I mean, they have, of course, dictators who served a long time, but I think we need to start to make some sense out of the nonsense. You look at, for instance, I'm an architect, totally unusual to be in politics. And when you walk through the city, you see, you see what we're doing, have done. You see Sanford Boulevard. You see the playgrounds. Memorial Field was messed up by politicians like Lyndon Williams. We have made our mark. The roundabout, all of that stuff comes out of the head of an architect, not a politician. We took people who in the community. All of those parks that you see were done by the community people. Took the YMCA, bought the YMCA, had the community people do a fantastic job. We were about 70% done when I left office. And so what did they do? They left it, and you go over there now and you see they ripped the place apart, I hear. When you look at what we're doing at the Stevens House, John Stevens, the founder of the city, we were redoing his place. You don't see anybody doing anything now.
I want to interrupt because something just hit me in my head, and I was thinking, and I sometimes forget. So I know I was down in Atlanta late October. I came back just in time and I covered all of that whole voter suppression thing with Stacey Abrams and purging people from the rolls. So that just made me think. You just said they said a bunch of people who are registered voters are not registered voters. So what happens when they vote? Are they purged from the rolls or something? Are they vote? Will they vote count now? Because they just said that they were not. The reason they weren't good because they were not registered voters. They're gonna vote now.
No, they are registered voters.
No, but I'm saying, they told you, they said that they're registered.
Right, now we went through the buff cards.
Right.
They are, in fact, registered.
But my point is, how can you argue that then? You can't have it both ways. If the argument against you was these voters are not registered, and then they vote, and their votes count. I mean,
it's called
I'm a little confused a little something.
Selective memory.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to follow it through. They didn't expect me, I'm sure, to go as far as we go. But they will be exposed. I call names. Lyndon Williams. He's always slithering around, starting stuff and try to take his hands off. Memorial Field. I was trying to do 4th Street Playground. I was supposed to get money from the county. He didn't do that. I had to scuffle and get what we could. He's telling people about he's going to save Memorial Field. He's the big, the person that did more damage than anybody else to Memorial Field. And so you got Clyde. He's a recipient of it, so he had to be a participant in it. And Clinton, of course, there's nothing too low for him to do. And so here we go. So I had to challenge them because they were wrong. And my attorney made a fatal mistake that we have to live with.
So, Mayor Davis, I want to interject for a moment because the thrust of your remarks thus far regarding this controversy about your disqualification of your petition would understandably raise questions about the role of the Democratic political establishment in the effort to remove you. You're implying that it was some sort of conspiracy. Now, I too, and we've raised on the show many times concerns about the multiple hats that Commissioner Lafayette wears and the tendency for it to put him in a conflict of interest, where he's making rulings about who's going to run against the candidate that he prefers. And I think that it's high time that we address this. I think it's long overdue. However, I do want to note that the process of challenging a petition is also in place in order to ensure that there is no kind of fraud. Now, to mention it is, I'm not accusing anyone of fraud, but that is the purpose of the challenge itself. And we can raise questions about whether or not people are too quick to resort to the challenge as a way of eliminating people from the ballot that really does substantive damage to the democratic process. But I'm a little concerned about the implication that, you know, the reason that your ballots were invalidated is for no other reason other than that there's a conspiracy to get you off the ballot, and that substantively there are no issues. And I do want to say this, because you know I've been very involved in the political process. I had a chance to look at the petitions that were submitted on behalf of your candidacy. Were it up to me? It's not. I'm not a resident of Mount Vernon. I found them to be eye-raising. And I
Found
say
to
that
be what?
I found them to be eye-raising.
Oh, eye-raising.
Yes, which is just to say, I'm going to be honest with you that I thought that they might not sustain a challenge.
Okay, did you look at any other petitions?
I looked at a few.
Did you look at any other petition?
I'm aware.
You
I looked
did not.
at
You didn't. So
Mayor Davis.
Yes.
Mayor Davis.
Yeah.
Please, because I did not answer you, do not attribute any thoughts to me. I simply didn't answer you. I said I looked at a few.
And so, what am I to gain from that observation?
What I am suggesting to you is that it would be a mischaracterization to say that your ballots were there was no grounds to believe that some of the signatures might have been invalid. That's all I'm saying.
How many would you say? I'm not doubting that some were. That's why we got so many of them.
This is a bigger issue. I'll just simply leave it at this: the number of witnesses for your petition
Yeah.
raised some very troubling questions for me as someone who's been involved in the petition process
Okay.
and knows how laborious it is to collect signatures.
I don't doubt that there was some. I never said all of them. I had 2750 of them. Do you think that I couldn't get 750 out of those?
I didn't look, so I'm waiting for it.
No, I am going to accept the ruling of the court. Whether it be because
I have no. I'm accepting it.
You
Too.
had no choice.
I have no choice. So,
I mean, my
But
what
you
I'm,
don't-
what I'm trying to say politely is you actually did have your day in court where you should have been allowed. I understand there was a technical glitch in your defense, but you should have had an opportunity to rebut the challenge, the contention that the signatures were invalid, and so we could have actually come to some sort of shared understanding. Because now we don't. You're really saying, Bob, I was cheated.
no, I didn't say that. I don't want to leave you to say I was cheated. I'm saying that my lawyer didn't. We came up. See, I heard when I saw the signatures, I see what you see. I'm not gonna There are some people who might not be up front. So I brought in another expert to go over those petitions. It wasn't like I'm sitting here saying all is well. I'm saying that out of the 2758 signatures, more than anybody else, do you think that my petitions are the only one that would be suspect? I knew I was going to be targeted. And so I brought in somebody from Atlanta, Georgia, to look over them. I went and got extra ones because I knew that could be some problem. I'm not saying I was cheated. What I'm saying to you is that we had enough signatures to get on the ballot. So if I weren't cheated, I guess you're saying then what happened? What happened is that we went through the buff cards and all of that, and the objectives, we went line by line just like they did, and we were picking up on an average of 6 or 7 per sheet.
A valid signature.
Valid
Yes.
signature.
Mm.
And so what I'm saying is that, all due respect to the lawyer, she overestimated or whatever. She was just, looking at Larry McDowell's because that's had the greatest amount. But we picked up about 800 or 900 that the board said wasn't registered, and they were. We had the buff cards.
Right.
So there was no nothing to not deny that. So I'm saying that we made a terrible, a legal error.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I was cheated. I never said that.
He said it was targeted. That's not targeted was the word he used. Not
Okay,
cheated,
yes,
not
I
cheated.
stand corrected,
Yeah.
Mayor Davis.
I'm not saying I'm coming up here cheating and saying people stole from me. No, I'm not saying that at all. We made a error that cost us being put on a petition. But even after that, I would say that we were targeted. But that's fine. I expected to be targeted. But at the end of the day, how does it affect the city? How does that affect the city?
Now that's where I wanted to go too.
Yeah.
Now we've gone through the process. For whatever the reason is, the answer is you're not on the ballot. You ran because you felt that you were the best person to lead the city forward or whatever.
Right.
Now that you do not have the privilege, I guess, to be, one of the candidates like that. Out of the candidates, I mean, it's one of those now. It's not you, and we prefer it to be you. Of course, that's what you want. But now, out of the rest of the candidates, is there anybody that you see that is possible could be good to run the city or?
To be good? No, not to be good.
Very clearly not that.
I don't know if you support anybody or you just want to. Is there anybody that you think?
I see what you're driving. First of all, I'm examining. There are a couple of steps that if I want to take them, and I have to decide whether I'm going to take them. I have been. All of the candidates want to talk to me with the exception of Delia Farquharson. I haven't heard from her.
She don't need you for her writing campaign. She got that by herself.
Yeah.
She going with that too.
See, Delia, bless her heart, has been on the council less than 2 years. And it's something about being mayor that really, I don't know, transforms people in their head. It's a hell of a job if you do it right. We have some serious institutional problems. Some of us forced upon us. For instance, there was a young lady that was in the lobby of Gary Pretlow's office, and she had a carriage and a baby, 2 babies, and we got to talking. Very attractive young lady. She's about 34 or 5. She's from Connecticut. She's had 10 kids. And I'm saying, how did you get down here? And so that's fine, but if you don't have the infrastructure or nobody's putting money into helping the city, it's going to be a problem. It's going to be educational problems. It's going to be, socioeconomic. The city cannot take it. If you look at, but the big gorilla in the conversation is the schools.
Well, let me ask you the same question in a reverse way. Is there any candidates that you see definitely cannot, that you can definitely not see be made? That you couldn't see.
Well, I couldn't see Delia being mayor. I think Sean is now. All of these are bright people. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure they're very bright at what they do. But this is not what they ought to be doing with their time for the good of the city. I think you have to look at not how many organizations you've been in. What did you do when you had an opportunity to do something? For instance, I was going to support Clyde Isley. And we set up, I said, you got to do something about this Memorial Field issue. And set it up. And I said, because you were the former commissioner of police, your word will have a lot of meaning. But you got to call for an investigation of why you take the police and misuse the police to do damage to a business. And to me, that's terrible. To me, that there's no forgiveness for that. And he didn't do it. And I said, well, what? And he came back, he wanted to support, and I said, first of all, you didn't do what we agreed that you were going to do.
Wow. So Mayor Davis, you called him and asked him.
Yeah, I set it up.
At the height of the controversy to try to bring some clarity to the issue.
Yeah, it should be investigated. You cannot take the police department or any other department and misuse it to abuse people. And that's what was done. And so he said, he called the Scarpino's office. I said, but Scarpino's not running for mayor.
Knock on the door.
You running for mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that shows a lack of understanding what your role would be and how long will you take to learn that. He's an intelligent person. I mean, likable guy. And then you take Sean. Sean was a member of a despotic regime. Did a lot of damage to people. And how do you explain that? Maybe she has an explanation, but certainly you ought to bring it up. I like Andre, but Andre, and I to give him credit, I worked with him, and he was the one that spearheaded the stopping Richie from marching and tearing down the tennis courts and all that. He got the restraining order, and the other council people didn't want to help him, so he stood up. I give him credit for that. But if he could put people around him and that's a big if. And that's a danger that all politicians have in administrative. You know the guy, and he worked on the campaign, and You might even be related to him.
Well, yeah, I don't agree with that. The current administration asked me 3 times what commissioner position I wanted. I didn't take. I mean,
but some people did.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm saying I was asked 3 times.
Yeah, but that's you personally.
Yeah.
So
I'm agreeing with
Yeah.
you. Not that I wouldn't have put my whole and I would have tried to learn everything, but I thought Mount Vernon was in this position right now. It didn't need nobody who needed to learn on the job. We needed some people that knew what to do when they got in there. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I didn't even,
the reason. My reasoning that I didn't need to run for mayor. I mean, I wasn't bored, but
So do you think that anybody, like you said, Andre, if he had surrounded himself with certain people, if one of the mayoral candidates, Andre or one, wanted your input, you know what I'm saying, on how to move the forward in the administration, would you be open to that? Or?
Oh, absolutely, because I love my city. I think that I'm from that generation that believes that you'll be judged by what you did for others, not for what you did for yourself. When I see people on the garbage trucks, I know I put them there. I see people in the fire department, put them there, police department. I didn't, some appreciated it, some didn't. But I'm very clear about what I did. And I will never regret. I will not lay my head down and be ashamed of what I did to people or for people.
Unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the show. Any last words? It's actually a couple of minutes over.
I think it's time for Mount Vernon to rise up and be the city it can be. But in order to do that, we have to have for our city greater expectations.
I agree.
And if we don't have greater expectations, you'll be presented with people who will accommodate you and won't give you anything because you didn't ask for anything. I would like to do the hotel. And this is from the thing I'm different from other people. I'm an architect. I want to do that hotel. I want to develop that whole area. Eventually, I'd like to tear down most of 4th Avenue and start again. I'd like to take the big development that's been stalled for the last 10 years up on 3rd Street and 4th Avenue and 5th Avenue. I want to see that immediately done. I want to restore the building department, planning department back, because if you don't have those departments, you can't do development. I would like to go into the communities from time to time and just see how people are feeling. And I would like to especially be attracted to my efforts with younger folks, preparing other folks. Well, let me just say before I left, somebody said old school. I don't know why you call himself old school.
Anthony.
Especially, that don't make any sense to you.
Shout out to Anthony Mitchell.
Mitchell, right.
Yeah.
I was saying, he said, well, he's done a lot of things, but my big complaint, he didn't put nobody to follow him.
Oh, on the
I actually
Yeah.
criticized you for that too. Actually, in 2015,
But that means you don't understand the history. Who you think put Clinton on his ticket when I ran?
those are the answers you gave me.
Yeah.
You told me,
I put
you
Clinton,
said, you said Richie too.
Baby boy, I put him on my ticket. I was so wait, what do you want me to do?
No, those were the answers you gave me because I definitely was a critique of mine to you.
I would love to. Listen, nothing better than to put a young. I mean, I'm turned on with that stuff, but they failed me. I didn't fail them. They failed me. Came back and tried to kill me. Both of them tried to kill me. Clinton brought in the FBI, and this kid, he went to all kind of stuff. They were like on steroids against me.
I am unaware of what transpired with Mayor Clinton, former Mayor Clinton, but I have to tell you, Mayor Davis, I was deeply disappointed and troubled by the decision of Mayor Thomas and, to be frank, County Legislator Lyndon Williams to take you to
Lyndon
court,
Williams is slick.
to take you to
He
court
thinks
over the Memorial Field issue, because as part of our democratic traditions, we do not seek to punish opponents who we defeated in a previous victory, and it seemed like to me that was a disregard of that fundamental rule, and I found it to be very troubling. And it also seemed to me like it was more likely to alienate you from Richard at a time when he really needed your assistance in making the transition.
Oh, I gotta end it there. We're already 5 minutes over.
All right.
Yeah. So
Oh, yeah,
we don't have no commercials over here like VOX. Check us out tomorrow on WVOX, the Black Westchester Power Hour, 11 a.m. to 12 noon. Thank you for everybody for tuning in. These interviews will go up tonight or tomorrow morning on Black Westchester, so I'll share them, everything. And one last, the thing about commenting on what you just said, never in my time have I seen, both on the national level and a local level, someone who can play can play the victor and the victim part as much as the current mayor of Mount Vernon and the president of the United States. With that said, thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, man.
You could be doing anything else.
Thank you.
You could be doing anything else right now, but you decided to ride with us, and we greatly appreciate it. This is Black Westchester Presents, the People Before Politics radio show, every Sunday, 6 to 8 on InTheMixRadio.com, giving you that real talk for the community since 2014. Peace.
22 million black victims of Americanism are waking up, and they're gaining a new political consciousness, becoming politically mature. And as they develop this political maturity, they're able to see the recent trends in these political elections. Any minority that has a block of votes that stick together is in a strategic position. Either way you go, that's who gets it. You're in a position to determine who go to the White House and who stay in the doghouse. You're the one who has that power. You and I have never seen democracy. All we've seen is hypocrisy. When we open our eyes today and look around America, we see America not through the eyes of someone who has enjoyed the fruits of Americanism. We see America through the eyes of someone who has been the victim of Americanism. We don't see any American dream. We've experienced only the American nightmare. We haven't benefited from America's democracy. We've only suffered from America's hypocrisy. And the generation that's coming up now can see it and are not afraid to say it. 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 And are not afraid to say it.